Welcome back to Finding Perfect Property, Diary of a Buying Agent. I am delighted to be joined today by Melissa Lesson, barrister and partner in the family department at Mishcon de Reya. Melissa specialises in separation, divorce, trusts and jurisdictional disputes, including complex multi-jurisdictional cases involving significant assets. Many of Melissa's clients have been high-profile figures, and she regularly works on cases with lawyers in Paris and on international prenuptial agreements. Melissa has law degrees from both the universities of London and Paris and was a pupil at One Hare Court. She was called to the bar in 1998 and became a partner at Mishcon de Reya in 2008. The Legal 500 described Melissa as a classy solicitor, trilingual, sophisticated, with an experienced and astute approach to financial cases, gives great advice and exudes and generates confidence in her clients. That is quite an accolade, Melissa. Thank you so much.
Very nice introduction.
Yes, well, it's all there and factual. So just brilliant career that you've had, and thank you so much for dedicating your precious time and coming on to the Finding
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So can you tell us about your journey? You know, how did you get into the world of law? What led you down the route to becoming a divorce lawyer? What was your path?
Well, when I was a teenager, and this is going to sound terrible, but when I was a teenager, I used to watch LA Law, and there was that blonde one who had the perfect bob and those little pink suits, and I thought, oh, how great! I'd like to do what she's doing. How fun! Oh my God. Thankfully, I grew up. And decided actually I really like fixing things. I really like solving problems. And then really the job that I do now, that is 90% of what I'm doing every day. Yeah. So that's kind of how I got there. But the initial thing, instead of, wanting to save the world, it was, I'm afraid, the blonde one from LA. So
you knew from a really young age, it was your calling?
Yeah, well, initially I wanted to be a vet. And then I realised that involved sort of standing in fields with sheep and it wasn't going to be my thing. So I did evolve. But yeah, I would say late teens, I thought, oh, this might be an interesting thing to do.
It's great that so many people go through life not really knowing what they want to do. So it's amazing that you kind of found your calling so young in life, thanks to a TV programme. Brilliant. You're trilingual, which is amazing. You speak obviously fluent English, but also French and Italian.
I do.
So tell us a bit about how that
that's come about.
Yeah.
So I'm half French, which accounts for the French part, and I actually spoke French before I could speak English.
Yeah.
And the Italian part came about when I met my husband, because my husband is Italian, and so I learned Italian. I mean, I don't speak to him in Italian. He speaks French and English perfectly well, but for me, it was a very important thing. To know his family, to know his culture, to know his country.
Yeah.
I felt I should learn the language, and so. I definitely don't speak it as well as I speak French and English, but I can absolutely hold down a conversation. I can speak to my children's nanny, all of those sort of things.
And it's the language of love.
It is the language of love.
So it's quite ironic that a divorce lawyer speaks
Italian.
But that's brilliant to speak 3 languages. And you also, because of your linguistic skills, deal with cases that are in France as well as in England.
I do, absolutely. I have, there's quite a significant proportion of my client base is French or Italian.
Yeah.
And I think also what has happened over the years is I sort of get identified as the not necessarily English lawyer.
Yeah.
And so Europeans, Spanish, Germans and so on will sort of associate me as being the one that might understand them a bit more culturally.
Yeah.
Even though I might not speak their language, I think there is a perception that, oh, she might get it that I'm actually not from here and I have a different way of approaching things. And actually I do understand that. Yeah. So it has enabled me to build a niche actually.
And these are clients who are based in the UK, but originally from France or Italy. I mean,
generally
London is known as the divorce capital of the world. Why is that?
Well, because it's a very generous jurisdiction to the less financially able party, which tends to be the wife.
Yeah.
And that's how it has built its reputation. There was definitely a time where people would try and what we would call forum shop. And if they could get a link to England so that they could establish jurisdiction and start proceedings here, that was going to be favourable for them.
Yeah.
And so that's how that's how we built our reputation.
Yeah, amazing. What do you think are some common misconceptions that people have about divorce and matrimonial law?
I think there are several. I mean, one that I come across very often is people still thinking that the concept of a common law wife exists. It doesn't. And yet people do think, oh, if you live together for a very long time and you've got children, then you are effectively as good as married. You are a common law wife and you have the same kind of rights as if you were married.
Right.
And that absolutely is not the case.
Okay.
So I see some of that. I think another one that I see a lot, especially with my client base, is people who think that because they've got a prenuptial agreement from another country, that's going to be valid here. And so they will typically come to me and say, well, neither my husband or I are British. We weren't married in Britain.
Yeah.
It's fine. We've got a marriage contract from Italy or France or Spain or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're fine. And I have to say to them, actually, you're not.
Wow.
You really aren't.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing that I come across a lot is people somehow think that there will be justice in this process. You know, they think they might get their pound of flesh, or that there will be some kind of punishment for somebody's bad behaviour in a marriage.
Yeah.
And there won't be. And I think in financial proceedings, we as family lawyers very often say if both parties come out of it not entirely happy, that's probably the right outcome.
Yeah.
You know, there has to be a little bit of give and take on both sides.
Yeah. Interesting. It's February.
It is.
We're rapidly heading towards Valentine's Day, so it's a opportune moment or an ironic moment for this podcast, we could say. Do you think there are sort of moments in the calendar that are sort of hot spots when your phone rings more? People saying that they want to start proceedings and they want to separate, like after a long summer holiday or Christmas.
Yes. I mean, the press tends to whip this up into this sort of frenzy of, divorce day is the 1st of January.
Yeah.
It's not quite like that. But I think certainly any moment where people have had to spend time together as a family, and especially at Christmas where it's all, fun and happy, invariably there will be a sort of uptake in calls and new inquiries. So certainly after Christmas, after the long summer holidays, you tend to have a kind of uptake in people wanting advice.
Makes sense. And tell me a bit about COVID. What was that like for you? What was that like for your clients? Did it go quiet, or did you get even more phone calls?
It was very strange. Yeah. I mean, it was strange for everybody, but it was very strange. Firstly, because I started getting clients that I never met. Yeah. I was doing it all on a screen, and that was very strange.
Yeah.
I had a lot of clients seeking advice, but not wanting to actually do anything. And I think that's understandable. I mean, the world was upside down. Everybody was thinking, oh my God, am I going to have a job? I'm homeschooling my children. What on earth is going to happen? So putting on top of that, and I'm going to get divorced, was, I think, too much for a lot of people. So there were lots of whispered conversations from people's spare rooms, sort of, I'm really unhappy, what am I going to do? But people waited for a lot of times, people waited if they could.
Yeah.
And then certainly from my perspective, what I found is between the lockdowns, there was a sudden spike with people then saying, I can't do another lockdown with that person. I have got to do something about this. I need to move out. I need to get the ball rolling. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. So it was a strange time.
Very strange. I think it's strange for all of us, but
absolutely
interesting to hear how it affected your world. You've looked after many high-profile clients who shall remain nameless, obviously confidentiality, but often in different countries and with major assets. How does the process of divorce differ when there are significant property and asset holdings involved?
There has to be a lot of disclosure. There will have to be valuations. It becomes a longer, more arduous process because there is, the court needs to have a full understanding of how the finances in this family have worked. So they are going to need to have valuations of companies, valuations of property portfolios. There is going to have to be a bit of digging. There is going to have to be a lot of questions get asked, a lot of answers are required, a lot of further paperwork is needed. And often, if there are assets in multiple jurisdictions, you're going to need lawyers in those jurisdictions. Yeah. You're going to need to get sort of a whole.
It's very expensive.
It gets very expensive.
Yeah.
It does get very expensive.
And how can you be sure that there is full disclosure? And things aren't sort of squirreled away. There isn't a yacht hiding somewhere in the Maldives, or
it's difficult. But one of the aspects of disclosure is that at the point when disclosure is given initially, it covers the previous 12 months. Mm-hmm. If there are reasons to want more than 12 months, for example, the parties have been separated for longer than that time, or there are suspicions, you can get longer than that. And then there has to be an analysis. So you will be looking through the bank statements and the credit card statements, and you'll be tracking money.
Wow.
And so actually, if there are hidden assets, quite often they will become apparent through the way that money has moved over the past 12, 24 months.
Yeah. Gosh, forensic.
Yeah, absolutely, it is.
And can you share any memorable or challenging cases that you've worked on that involved the division of property?
Well, I mean, that I would say most of my cases are like that, because in my experience, the properties, or certainly one property at least in a portfolio, is going to be the most emotive asset in the case.
Yeah.
Very often there is going to be one party, one spouse, who is going to be very, very attached to a certain property. And it may be the property they live in, it may be their holiday home, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There is a huge emotional attachment, and that creates all kinds of problems, and it can create an imbalance in the case. The other party might use it as leverage.
Yeah.
It creates problems in terms of getting it valued, getting it sold if it has to be sold.
Yeah.
All sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that one case stands out, but I think it's the fact that property is so emotive to so many people that it becomes an issue in most cases.
Yeah, and I think as well around sort of the issue of valuation, getting both parties to agree on who that valuer should be.
Yes, and that becomes quite difficult as well, especially if one person is reluctant to sell, doesn't want to have to sell, doesn't want to accept that there is going to be that.
Yeah.
It's difficult. You know, obviously the courts are used to certain valuers that they see quite frequently who produce reports for the court. Initially, we try and use, we'll put forward 3 or 4 names, get the other side to choose. Yeah. That's kind of the most sensible way to start the process rolling.
Just to give some comfort. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. And is it always the case that the assets get sold, or are there cases, is it a case of the wealthier the clients you're looking after, the less likely it is that assets get sold?
Yes, certainly if there is a lot of liquidity and there is a lot of wealth, then it's easier to simply resolve things by transferring to various, to each side, transferring assets to each side. But it will also depend on the relationship between the couple at that point, because some people decide, as I was just saying, in terms of, using property as leverage, they decide, well, no, you want that property, I don't want you to have that property, so I don't agree to it being transferred to you, even though in the context of the case it could be. And that, that creates a lot of conflict.
Yeah, very, very, very tricky. Are prenups still popular?
Yes, they are. They are. They're always, I think they're always a difficult one in this country, because we're not educated in that way. A lot of European countries, everybody knows you get married, you elect your matrimonial regime, which is akin to having a prenuptial agreement in those countries. It's just part of the process.
Yeah.
Americans, very used to it. It's just part of what you do.
Yeah.
In England, I think culturally, we're not really there yet.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I think most of the prenups that I do, one or other or both, are not going to be British.
And what happens if you don't get a prenup, but then during the course of your marriage you think, gosh, we should have done that, we don't want to get divorced, but actually it would have been a good idea to have that? Is that what's referred to as a postnup?
It is, but it's very difficult to get people to engage in that, because when it's a prenup, there is an end date. You've got to get it done before the wedding. Everybody's got to concentrate, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
With a postnup, it's open-ended.
Yeah.
And you tend to find there's one party pushing for it and the other party saying, well,
Yeah.
And there is no engagement. So they are often very difficult to actually pull off.
Yeah. And just for the benefit of listeners who may not be familiar, with what a prenup is, in layman's terms, what is a prenup and what does it do?
It's an agreement that sets out what will happen financially on divorce.
Okay.
And the intention is that everybody goes into this with their eyes open. They've had legal advice. They're doing it and agreeing it at a point where they love each other. Everything is good.
Yeah.
And the aim is to try and avoid conflict in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, not that, people don't want to go into marriage thinking about divorce, but the reality is 1 in 2, 1 in 3 people get divorced.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to minimize the conflict, minimize the eventuality that they have to be discussing these things at a time when they don't love each other anymore, when things are really emotive and unhappy and they've got children and all the rest of it. So,
and do you think they're more common when you've got two people marrying where one party is significantly more wealthy than the other?
Yes, absolutely. And also people who have been, where one party has been divorced before and they feel that they've been burnt by that experience.
Twice shy.
Exactly. And they don't want to have that again.
So, you know, for people who are about to get married and are just, you know, normal, you know, not ultra high net worths, you know, professionals, let's sort of put them into that category. What advice would you give that type of client?
I think that the same rules apply. If they want to sort of think, well, actually, I'm going to approach this really realistically.
Yeah.
There is always going to be the potential for divorce. I don't want this to ever be a fight.
Yeah.
Let's just set this out on paper now. Yeah, that applies.
Yeah.
And also, I think there are couples who, at the time that they're getting married, they're in a similar financial position. But one of them might think, well, actually, I think in the future, if all goes well and the stars align, I may be, I'm at point A now, but I may be at point Z.
Yeah.
And there will be a huge imbalance between us. And actually, I want to deal with that now, that eventuality.
Gosh, awkward conversations.
Very awkward. but one of the things I would say about anybody going into a prenuptial agreement is you must talk to each other.
Yeah.
Because I do get clients who haven't even raised it with with their fiance.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Do talk to each other first before you talk to your lawyers.
I want to sort of turn back to property and how that gets affected when people are separating. 2024 and last year, we're in a bit of a slow sales market at the moment. Properties can take, a year or longer to sell. This year, we've got a general election, so there's bound to be some uncertainty as we go through 2024. How does the impact of what the market is doing, or how does the effect of what the market is doing impact divorce settlements and property division, or does it?
It does to an extent, because I think there are some people who are reasonably savvy and who really do think about these sorts of things and think, actually, I think I might wait a bit. This isn't a good time. Let's see if we can kind of, put a sticking plaster over it and carry on for a bit longer until things pick up.
Yeah.
But I think for most people, really, if they're even thinking about divorce, they're probably at that point of no return, and they may be able to sort of wait a couple of months, like in COVID, wait to get through lockdown, but actually they just can't bear it after a certain point. And so whilst they may, they will go into it thinking, oh, this is a really bad time, and my property was worth X, now it's worth Y, it's not great.
Yeah.
After a certain point, the desire for happiness or to overcome unhappiness kind of prevails.
Yeah. And I just want to talk about sort of the different stages, if you like, of the process, because it's, not every case ends up in court, does it? There are sort of various...
Most of them don't.
Yeah, so just talk to me a little bit about that.
The emphasis, the trend, I think, lately has been to try and take it out of the court arena. And that's in part because the world has changed. Post-pandemic, we're doing a lot of things online.
Yeah.
The whole process is different. But also, the courts are overloaded. If you have to wait to go through the court process, you're in the hands of an imperfect, very slow machine. And taking some control over that and having private hearings, which is something that we do a lot of now.
Yeah.
We have them in solicitors' offices. You can choose the judge.
Yeah.
Generally, they're barristers, and that works really, really well. And it gives people a bit more control of the process, about the speed of the process,
and keeps
gets
press,
a good result,
and keeps the press
away.
out.
Absolutely,
the press love a good divorce.
They do.
The higher the profile,
they do.
There's been some big headlines on very high profile divorces over the years. So.
Yeah, but you're right. It keeps it anonymous.
Yeah. The term consciously uncoupling,
Gwyneth Paltrow,
was made famous by the lovely Gwyneth Paltrow when she announced her separation from Chris Martin. Is that really a thing?
I think there are a lot of people who do think about the fact that they will need to be able to sit next to each other at their children's weddings. And certainly it's something that I talk to them about early on. You know, it doesn't have to be a war. It shouldn't be a war. The aim is not to polarize people. They need to be able to talk to each other. They need to be able to deal with their children. So I think there is an element of that sort of, you know, unconscious uncoupling. But it's difficult because emotions run high. And what I find very often in a divorce is that there is one of the couple who is ready emotionally, who is psychologically is ready to press the button and move forward, but the other one isn't. They're not in the same place. And that imbalance is always going to create conflict. And so it's a very difficult thing to do.
And I guess when kids are involved, you know, everything becomes much more difficult as well.
Very, very, very.
I want to move on to tax a little bit.
Okay.
Because I've heard some stories about people just deciding to live totally separate lives but not get divorced for tax reasons.
Yes.
Is that a thing?
It is. I mean, not very common. Not very common. And I think, but as I said before, you know, at some point people think, actually, my desire for happiness kind of prevails.
Right.
But I have had clients who do that. I mean, normally they are incredibly wealthy, and so they have a tax structure in place where actually if they had to dismantle that because they've got to pay 50% to their spouse, I mean, the loss would be significant to both. And if they have a decent relationship, and you know, I'm thinking of a particular client at the moment, you know, the children have grown up, they don't have that kind of issue, and so actually they can lead separate lives.
Amazing.
They've got the wealth to enable it. I suppose that, you know, the crux point might come if one of them wants to remarry.
Yes, absolutely. But yes, I suppose they're free to have other partners and live their separate lives. It's
and
just
a lot of
piece of paper.
Yes, and a lot of people don't want to remarry once they've got divorced. You know, they stay in long-term relationships perhaps, but they don't necessarily remarry. So it does work for some people.
Interesting. What are some of the most rewarding aspects about being a divorce lawyer?
I think seeing your client from a point where they are incredibly upset, incredibly distressed, and see everything very negatively, very bleakly, and get them out the other end where actually they see light at the end of the tunnel. They have gone through the process of grieving, because it really is a process of grieving. And they come out the other side, and you have been able to get them to that point. You've been able to help them get there, and hopefully they're still talking to their ex-spouse, and hopefully their children are in a good place as well, and that's really satisfying. And also the ones that ring me up sort of 4 years later, you know, having said to me, I'm never getting married again ever, and then they ring me up 4 years later and say, guess what? And you think, oh, you know, love prevails.
And what about working with sort of external experts like buying agents, for example? Do you think you know, do you think that's an important part of the process? You know, do you often sort of bring in external experts to sort of help move clients on to what comes next, what comes after divorce?
Yes, very much. I mean, I think there are different strands to that. There are psychologists are really helpful. Therapists are really helpful early on to get to deal with that side of things, because otherwise I think for clients it's very easy to start using their lawyer as their therapist. Because you know everything that's gone on. I think buying agents are incredibly helpful, especially for women who suddenly need to take control of their financial situation, find themselves a house, especially if they've been very attached to the house that they've got to move out of. I think, you know, they need guidance, they need help. It's enormously well, it's invaluable, I think, to have that kind of help, because they can feel incredibly lost.
I agree. Do you think it's a bit of a cliche that it's often, you know, the woman in the relationship that feels that and has absolutely no idea what the running costs of the home are because they've never had to deal with it, and therefore needs, you know, lots of help post-divorce?
It does happen a lot. It does happen a lot. Even with women who've had very successful careers. Quite often within their couple, they've taken on quite traditional roles at home, and so they've left, even, they may have a very successful career and have their own investments and so on, but they've left a lot of the financial decision making to their husbands.
Yeah.
Because they've taken on, the schools and the children and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Very natural sort of division of tasks. And they can feel very lost when they come out of the other end and think, gosh, I've got to deal with all of this myself, and I don't even know where to start, and where do I look, and I want to be in the same area, and I want to be near the school and my friends, and I don't even know what to do, and I don't have the time, and very difficult. So I think, as I said, therapists are very important, property agents are very important, financial advisors, how do they invest their lump sums, all of that, very important. It's a bit, it takes a village.
Yeah, so you've got to have a great black book of contacts to be a divorce lawyer. Thank you so much. I'm going to sort of end the podcast by asking you some of your top tips. My first question is, if you're thinking about getting a divorce, how do you choose the right divorce lawyer?
I think you have to feel that person is a good fit for you. You have to trust them. Mm-hmm. You have to. You'll know. It's a bit like going on a date. You feel the chemistry. You will know that you get on with that person. That you feel comfortable telling them all your intimate details, because you are going to have to go through that. Yeah. And that you trust them to get you out the other end. Yeah. It's a bit like a date, and there will be some people that they will know immediately, and some people will go and see 3 or 4 solicitors before they make a decision. Yeah. But it's very important. You've got to get the fit.
Good advice. I think it's similar for my industry as well. I think chemistry is really important.
Yeah.
Mediation or court?
Mediation, if you can, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
But certainly it is one of the things that I say to my, unless you've got particular circumstances where they can't possibly be in your room together.
Yeah.
If they can, I try and encourage them to at least have one session and see how it goes.
Yeah.
And sometimes that will lead to another session, or sometimes at the end of that one session, they will know that it's just not going to work. Yeah. But at least try. Because it's the same as that, it's the same as I was saying, you've got to be able to speak to each other, despite it all.
Yeah, 100%. And advice or tips for anyone thinking about getting into this as a career?
Oh gosh, you've got to have some emotional intelligence. It is not about knowing the section whatever of whichever act, or it's not about knowing the law necessarily. It's about knowing people, being able to read people, being able to predict, being able to understand what they're going through, how they're feeling, what you can do to alleviate that, being very practical minded.
Amazing. Great tips. Thank you so much. Well, that brings us to the end of this month's episode of Finding Perfect Property, Diary of a Buying Agent. Thank you so much to Melissa for joining me today and sharing her valuable insights on anyone that's thinking about getting a divorce or getting married and needing to get advice. Before that, do reach out to Melissa at Mishcons. For more information about how to purchase property in prime central London, please get in touch via our website, and don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever podcast channel you use to listen. See you next time.